And I'm going to go ahead and do our spiritual thought for the day. And so it is from this book, Daily Joy, from our prophet, Russell M. Nelson. And I was kind of thumbing through, and I actually found two thoughts back by back, or day by day, that I just thought worked really well together that I liked. So it's from actually February 18th and 19th. And so the first one is the rewards of obedience. And it's from Isaiah 1:19. If you're willing and obedient, ye shall eat the good of the land. And so our prophet says, you will find great joy in total obedience to God's laws. While some others choose which commandments you will keep, you know the fallacy and danger of this approach. It will only lead to misery. You will gain protection and spiritual strength in complete obedience. After all, he or she who does not stand for something will likely fall for anything. What will keep you joyful, safe physically and spiritually? Obedience. Obedience to all of God's commandments will allow the Holy Ghost to be your constant companion. Obedience to your baptismal covenants. Sorry, apparently I'm nervous. I haven't done this for 6 months. Renewed weekly as you partake of the sacrament will allow the Spirit of the Lord to be with you. Such obedience will prepare you to be great leaders, great wives, husbands, great mothers and fathers. Such obedience will allow you to become more like the Lord. So I went through the temple for the very first time in November. And so actually it was my year anniversary last week. And that was one of the things that I thought of was, do I want to, be kind of the best I can be, or just kind of skate by the, see what I can get away with. And I know for me, I don't have judgment, but it seems like particularly in the singles group, that there are kind of the two camps. There are a lot of people that either, try to do the best they can, and then there's some that just try to make it through. And I know for me that being a convert and the life that I've had, that it's so easy to slip up. And for me, it's so much easier to be as obedient as I can and not give the adversary a place to slip in. And that's how I've found is the rewards of obedience. And so the next one after that was love as he loved. This is from 3 Nephi 27:27. Therefore, what matter of men ought you be? Verily I say unto you, even as I am. Jesus Christ's exemplary life was his ministry and mortality. He taught us how to live, how to love, how to pray, how to focus on his ordinances, how to know and teach his scriptures, how to follow his example and endure to the end, and more. Enduring to the end includes the endowment of the temple, along with those sealing ordinances that will enable us to return to dwell with him and with our Father in heaven and with our families. His ministry among men serves to provide us an example for us. There's no limit to the number of people who can follow his example. We can love as he loved. We can pray as he prayed. We can focus on the ordinances as he did. We can teach from the scriptures, and we can endure to the end as he did. And that's my testimony, that is why we are here, is to try to be like Jesus. And I don't know how else to do that, but to be obedient to his commandments. And I say these things in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ, amen. And it is with my great pleasure to turn the time over to the Tykerts We had them on, I don't know how long it was ago.
It was exactly a year ago. You talked about your temple trip and showed pictures, and I remember very vividly how exciting it was.
How funny is that? That's amazing. And I just think you guys are great. I just love that they so they're life coaches, both of them, and they've got their podcast, which I do listen to and enjoy quite a bit. And they have a whole program that is designed for, it stands for Lily, Love in the Latter Years. And so it's designed for people just like us, mid-singles and beyond, that are, you know, second marriages, or for me, in my case, would be a first marriage. And so it's just designed for exactly our audience. And I'm going to turn the time over to them.
Thank you. Just so you guys know, if any of you remember, we were working on a book when we last met with you, and it's out just recently.
We actually just got our copies today.
So anyway, this presentation will have some overlap with the book, but it's not about the book.
Show the book one more time so I can see it one more time, because that is so exciting.
Yeah, it's available on Amazon. So, you know, that song we started with, Consider the Lilies. If you think about that, the scripture verse that's based on, it talks about how, you know, we worry about having enough to eat, having the right clothes to wear. And Jesus says, you know, Solomon in all of his glory was not arrayed like one of these lilies. And I think it's a powerful little message about having faith that God will provide what we need and array us with glory as well.
And that's certainly something we need when we're single and relying solely on ourselves, to know that God will be there for us when we're not partnered, especially. But even when we're partnered, we need him as well.
Right. So we'll jump in. And all right, can everybody see this? Okay. So this is the title of our presentation, Rising Like a Phoenix.
We can see the whole thing, including the side one, though. So you might want to go into presentation mode.
Thank you. That's what we're trying to figure out.
Mm-hmm.
How to do that?
Yeah.
File?
No.
Jeff, there's one other way to do it that's even a little bit better. If you stop sharing and then go back to share screen and advanced, then you can actually choose. So advanced is up at the top, and you can choose share a portion of the screen. And then that creates this green box that you can then just put around the presentation portion. And that way you can see the next slides and click on them when you're ready to, but all we see is what's in that green box.
Okay.
So you just hit share, and then at the very top, there's a advanced sharing and then portion. Good. So now you can just resize that green box.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. So yeah, this is the title of our presentation, Rising Like a Phoenix, Personal Growth and Loving Relationships. And this is something we think has a great deal of meaning to every mid-single, because most of us came to be single by some kind of feeling of tragedy or misfortune or loss. And so we're talking about healing, growing, thriving, and ultimately making loving relationships. most of you are probably old enough to have some memory of President Ronald Reagan. And he recently, it was toward the end of his presidency, he gave an interview to Tom Brokaw as he was kind of on his way out of office. And in the interview, he talked about having wanted this job as the manager of the sporting goods department at Montgomery Ward. And he didn't get the job. Somebody who had been a very popular basketball player, local, hometown hero, got the job instead. And he talked about being very disappointed and feeling like he was kind of out of hope. And about 3 weeks later, he got talking to someone who was involved with a local baseball team. And he ended up, through an improbable series of events, getting hired as a baseball announcer. And of course, he moved into larger and larger markets and eventually ended up in Hollywood as an actor, which took him into politics, which led to him becoming president of the United States and changing the world. And he said that, Brokaw asked him, so if you had gotten that job at Montgomery Ward's, and the president answered, might still be working there. And Brokaw said, instead of president of the United States. And he said, right. He said, me not getting that job led to all the good things that followed. Well, he also talked about being in love with a young woman who he met at college, and life kind of took them to different places for a while. And so he ended up finding out that she had met someone else and was going a different direction in her relationship, and he was heartbroken. And Brokaw asks him again, so if you had married her, he said, might not have everything I have now. He's talking about he might still be living in Illinois and wouldn't have had the famous relationship that he had with his wife, Nancy, which, we, at least by all public indications, was a very close and loving marriage.
That's my favorite part of the story.
Yeah. So why don't you go ahead and give some takeaways from this?
Some of the best things in life come from the worst things.
Yeah. And if you think about it, I'd like to shift to Joseph, who was sold into Egypt. Now, as most of you know, Joseph was his father's favorite child, and his brothers were all jealous of him, and they faked his death and sold him into Egypt as a slave. Can you think of anything worse than being sold as a slave by loved ones into a foreign country where you probably don't speak the language and totally different culture, and you're away from your family and friends and everybody you loved? And then after that happens, it gets worse. Joseph, finds himself accused of a crime he didn't commit, in fact, by the person who did commit the crime, and he goes to prison. And can you imagine how forsaken he must have felt by God? How, you could imagine him praying, God, why would you do this to me? And of course, through an improbable series of events that he could never have orchestrated, the Pharaoh comes to trust him because Joseph can interpret his dreams. And he ends up being essentially prime minister of the country and married to a member of the royal family and saving a nation, thousands, if not millions of people, because of the famine that he predicted. And I think the most interesting part of the whole story of Joseph is that when his family comes to Egypt looking for food, he forgives his brothers. And in fact, he tells them, do not be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place, and realize that it was not you who sent me here, but God. And I think sometimes even people doing evil are serving God's purposes without knowing it, because God knows the end from the beginning. And when I think about my experience, I feel something like Joseph. Go into that.
Well, it's like what Jeff said about you mentioned that, wait, skip my mind. That sometimes evil doing is serving the Lord's purpose. And in that things are not right, and that it couldn't possibly be serving any good, especially when you're in the middle of it. When you're in the middle of being mistreated or being in a situation you never thought you would be, it's really hard to see the end from the beginning.
You know, when I was going through, I've been divorced twice, as has Cathy. And when I was going through my first divorce from my kid's mom, it was a lengthy marriage, 18 years in all, and 15 meaningfully. I walked around for 4 years probably feeling like I'd been kicked in the stomach, and it was an actual physical pain. And I took it to bed every night. I woke up to it every morning. And, you know, for a while, I even kind of lost the will to live. And I tell you this because some of you have undoubtedly felt that low, felt like you're staring into the abyss, like you're in this terribly dark place that you can't get out of. And it's interesting that they have done functional MRIs of people's brains, control groups, as well as people who have recently been through a significant relationship loss that they didn't want, a breakup or a divorce. And the same areas of their brains light up as people that are experiencing actual physical pain. And the loss of a relationship is the only thing that does that. It's the only emotion that does that. You know, garden variety depression doesn't do it, anxiety doesn't do it, but the loss of a relationship does cause you actual physical pain when you are grieving that.
Yeah, and it might be different for everyone. For him, it was kick it in the stomach feeling. For me, it was my heart. It felt like I could hardly breathe. I believe there was someone with a question. Is that still the case?
Well, I realized that we were going to ask questions at the end, so it's okay.
Okay.
The comment that you made, I was just going to say the comment that you made about evil doing, you know, like that maybe Heavenly Father allows, some of this evil thing to happen, we think, why is this evil allowed to happen? And then that changes the trajectory of someone's path, and you just think that was the most awful thing that happened, but then all of a sudden something good happens. I think it's actually Heavenly Father coming along and preparing, like saying, you know what, I know it's about to happen, and I'm going to have this ready when they endure, if they can just get through this, if they can just understand that I'm going to be there and have this other opportunity 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road, that's going to be far beyond anything that they thought was so great, so wonderful. So I think sometimes God is there to catch us, like we think, oh, there was this evil thing that happened, but then there was this great thing. I think that great thing comes along because there's grace, because God has grace. And he's like, I'm going to be there to catch you and provide something else that's even better.
And that
Because
can give us hope.
because we're obedient, because we're trying, you know what I mean? Do you kind of feel like that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for anyone who's still in the middle of it, they can have hope based on other stories of that instance, where, sometimes it's for years that it's a really horrible mess, right? And then, eventually something good comes, and that's what we can look forward to.
Yeah.
And I wanted to share my personal testimony of this because I know this is true in my own life and my own experience. Shortly after my separation from my former wife, my kid's mom, I moved back to Utah and took a position in a law firm in Provo. And when I look back, it was probably a mistake. At the time, I thought that any change would be good change. But that isn't the point. 8 months later, I left that firm. It wasn't working out. It wasn't a good fit. I went to work for a startup. About 5 months later, they couldn't pay me anymore, and I was out of a job. And I was trying to start a new law firm all by myself when I was emotionally destroyed still from my divorce. I didn't have my strength. And I was, the first Christmas after I had moved back to Utah, I was driving my kids back up to Washington, right on the Canadian border, about 1,000 miles. I was driving them back to their mom after the holidays. It was New Year's Eve. And I pulled off at a Flying J in Snowville, Utah. And when I came out, my car wouldn't start. And I tried everything I knew how. I tried jumper cables. It was a stick shift, so I tried to start it by compression. That didn't work either. I tried to clean the battery posts and see if that was the issue. Nothing worked. And called my insurance. They said, oh, you don't have roadside assistance. So anyway, I called a towing company and I said, can you just have someone come out and look at it? Maybe there's something simple I'm missing. Well, the person that came out told me, I think your timing belt's probably shot. Oh gosh, what's that going to cost? And he said, at least $600. Well, at that time, I knew I probably had $200 to $300 in my checking account. So I was instantly really depressed. And I spent the entire night in the trucker's lounge at that Flying J, watching TV with my boys, feeling just the lowest kind of shame I've ever felt. How did I have a doctorate degree and a postdoc degree. How did I end up here? And anyway, in the middle of all of that, I remember feeling like Scarlett O'Hara, Gone with the Wind. With God as my witness, I'll never be hungry again. And I made this vow that I was going to dig out of this situation and never be in such a horrible stranded position again. Well, it turned out that we were able to resolve that situation and get the kids back to school on time and everything. But it was it was a scary and really awful feeling that I had. And the next year, New Year's started to roll around, and I started thinking about my experience the previous New Year. And I was thinking my life really wasn't that different from a year before. And that really bothered me because I had been so serious about this vow that I had made. And I was going to work every day and trying, but I wasn't getting any traction. And so I made the decision to pray, and I fasted and prayed, and over a 2-week period really did a lot of soul searching about this. And the answer that kept coming to me is, you are meant to shine, not hide your light under a bushel. And I realized that even though I was going to work and I was putting in time, I wasn't really being bold anymore. It wasn't I was hiding. I was avoiding people, which you can't do if you're running your own business. And so I made a very bold Facebook post that led to a career opportunity in Texas. And I moved to Texas, and I was there for 3 years. And there I started to get back on my feet financially, and had some breathing room finally. And I started to recover myself. I started to feel like I know what it is to be happy. I remember. And then, long story short, I got married the second time while I was in Texas, and it was a short marriage for reasons that are beyond this presentation. It lasted about 6 months. But I got laid off from my corporate job in October of 2015. I found out in November, early November, that I had failed the Texas bar by 1 point. And then my second wife and I split up, and my son and I drove my car all the way back here to Utah for, again, about 1,000 miles with my different car, threatening to throw a rod. So I came back to Utah. I had to figure out how to buy a car with no money, no job, no business, having just been divorced for the second time. Well, shortly after I moved back to Utah, I met Cathy, and she couldn't tell you, I told her my whole situation on our first date, that I was in, that I was a financial mess, that I was couch surfing at my parents', and that I was trying to get a law practice started. And, not a very appealing story. But
you're awesome.
To make a long story short, I can tell you, if I hadn't lost and over 5 years, I built a law firm that was making a 6-figure income.
Oh, you're muted, Jeff.
Yeah, something funny happened. I'm not sure what, but all right.
Like your internet is kind of glitching and freezing sometimes.
Huh.
Yeah, I think we lost about the last 30 seconds.
Okay, so
Where did we leave off?
Something about I think how he kind of laid out his whole story to you on like the first date, and then some chopping here and there, and then something about starting a new law practice.
Okay.
Okay. Well, it took me about 5 years to get that practice to making a six-figure income for me and my family. And I often think of Tony Robbins says, most people grossly overestimate what they can do in 1 year and grossly underestimate what they can do in 5. And it took about 5. And then through a series of really improbable events, actually a marketing message of mine got through to the Attorney General of Utah. And he said, I think you have an interesting background. I'd like to meet you. And I met him and we got along well, but nothing came of that immediately. But a friend of mine in the Attorney General's office told me 6 months later or so about an opportunity in the Constitutional Defense Division.
Can you guys still hear us? Okay.
Okay. In the Constitutional Defense Division in the Attorney General's office. And constitutional law has always been my passion as an attorney. And so I applied for the position. And although I didn't think rationally I would get it, because people don't generally come out of solo practice into a job like that, something told me that if I applied for the job, it would be offered. And it was.
And you found out you had stiff competition too.
Yes, I had very stiff competition. And so the upshot of this whole story, like Joseph and like President Reagan, if I hadn't got laid off from my corporate job in Texas, I'd still be running oil and gas titles out in Houston instead of advising the governor and the attorney general on constitutional issues, which is a much better fit for me and much more of a dream come true for me. If I hadn't lost my second marriage
And your first.
and my first, I wouldn't have Cathy, and I wouldn't have her 2 sons, who I have doubled the number of sons that I have. And so I feel like I personally relate to Joseph, who was sold into Egypt, and to former President Reagan in saying that things that they would have, maybe seen initially as tragedies led to the greatest things in their lives. And in my case, led to the greatest things in my life, at least many of them, Cathy, the boys, and my new career. And so that's
Yeah, how do we?
That's
Sorry, it went away and then we have to bring it back up again. I'm sorry.
so that's the first point we really want to make. Not yet.
So you would want to unshare again and then share and do the advanced settings
Yeah.
and hit that one.
To the whole thing still.
Mhm.
Okay.
Stop share. Advanced settings. I'll try and take care of that while you're talking.
All right. So yeah, the upshot is the first point we want to make is no matter how deep your sorrow is or your grief, no matter how low you feel, if you're couch surfing with your parents at age 47, like I was, if you're starting all over in your late middle years, like I was, if you feel like nobody's ever going to want me because I've been divorced twice, or I have a health condition of some sort, or whatever the issue may be, I want to tell you with all of the sincerity I can muster that there is not only hope, but you have every reason to expect and believe that God knows things we don't, and that he is preparing you to become the person he envisions you becoming.
All right, can you see it now?
Nope, black screen.
How about
Okay.
now?
Nope. So you do stop share, and then you do
Yeah, okay, I
share,
did all that. It even
and you
has
did
a,
the, and
it
you
has
do
a
the,
yellow box
and,
around it.
and then you do the advanced settings, and then you
And the
do
portion
portion
of
of
the
the
screen, right?
screen, and then
Yeah.
you hit the share.
That's what we're on. Yeah.
And you've
All
got
right.
and you've
That's
got
what
the
we
right
did.
tab clicked, and then it should have a green box, and you adjust the box.
Yeah, it does.
Hey, Carly,
It
just,
does.
I think it's starting up. So I see it spinning on my side. So just give it another few seconds,
Okay.
you know, maybe 20 seconds. I think.
Although I think it's saying resume share, so I'm gonna,
Yeah,
does
let
that
it-
work?
Let's give it a second and see what happens. So for a long time, we've kind of been looking for a word that would describe that sense that we have that things are okay. And it's peace, but it's really more than that. Can you see our screen yet?
No, it's not showing yet. Sorry. So I'd stop sharing and
We'll
I don't
try it
know.
again. Okay, so we'll just walk it through it really quick. So screen share advanced portion of screen, right?
Yep.
Which we've done, and it has a green box around it.
So
And so
yeah,
we're
let's
just
just
gonna
leave it for a minute and see what
give
happens.
us a thumbs up if it comes up.
All right, so the word that we ultimately found is shalom, a word you've probably heard. It's a Hebrew word that is generally translated in the New Testament as peace. But it means more than that. It also means wholeness and restoration. And still nothing.
It's unfortunate because it's showing on our side the same as it did before. Carly, do you want to try on your end? She's going to try because she has it.
Okay. You want to try on your end, Carly? All right. So yeah, there's a slide that says shalom on it, which is what we've just been talking about. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Jeff introduced me to this word a few months ago, and I think it's that it's an energy of feeling good. It's a state of peace and tranquility. And when it's disrupted, we can feel emotionally overwhelmed and flooded.
Right. And so what we're looking for is two things. One is we want to notice when we are in a state of shalom and be conscious of it so that we understand when it's disrupted. And that does a few really important things for us. One, it teaches us what peace feels like and what anxiety feels like. And we're not always aware of that. And I think the second thing is that it allows us to understand and develop, all right, strategies for how do I get back my shalom when I'm feeling disrupted.
Mm-hmm. And feeling disrupted is more of a discomfort the more we are in the state of shalom. The more that we are in a general good state of being, the more we feel uncomfortable when it's disrupted.
Right. So one of the first things we want to talk about to people is after grief and loss, how do we find our shalom? How do we find our peace. Next slide. All right. One thing is that is really important is forgiveness. And do you want to talk about your experience with that?
Which thing?
Forgiveness.
Oh, you mean the quote from a former bishop?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so there was a former bishop of mine who was in a college family ward, and he had experienced some financial loss from a business partner who had wronged him, and he had decided to forgive this man for a much greater debt than what my husband at the time and I were dealing with, a financial loss that was much less severe. And I remember him saying, forgiveness isn't for the other person. It's a gift you give yourself. And I always remember that. I always have seen it differently since then. And that is that it's a gift we give ourselves of that peace and that shalom. That's how we get back to that state of shalom when we're feeling that we've been wronged. And, and maybe rightfully so, but how does it help us to feel that way?
Right. So for any of you that are divorced or maybe have not married, but have had relationships you had a lot of hope in, and for one reason or another felt betrayed or wronged, that can be a deeply painful thing. I've always liked, since I was 18, I kind of understood that the phrases in the Sermon on the Mount, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them that despitefully use you and persecute you. And then that passage ends up, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. And I kind of intuitively understood that means probably on our path to perfection, the hardest thing we'll ever have to do is learn how to forgive and love our enemies and bless those that have cursed us or do good to those that have despitefully used us and so forth. And you may feel that way about a former spouse or a former dating partner or, any other number of people in life for that matter. And I know for a while, I'm not proud of it, but I really did hate my former wife. And I had this burning rage and awful feelings inside of me. But I can tell you too that, we have a friendly relationship now. And over time, I was able to let go of those feelings and have compassion. Now, what does forgiveness look like? Reverend or Pastor Tim Keller talks about the parable of the mote and the beam. And he says that this is Jesus doing stand-up comedy in the Sermon on the Mount. That the beam, that no one's really walking around with a beam hanging off their eyeball. And, trying to see around that to get the speck out of somebody else's eye. I imagine Jesus probably had a speck in his eye on occasions, because if he was a carpenter, sawdust and so on. But anyway, it's not that there's a beam on your eyeball. It's that something that's really up close to you, something you is sitting on your eyeball. Number one is going to look bigger, and number two is going to impair your vision more than a speck hanging out in the air somewhere would be, or sitting on the workbench. It doesn't hurt unless it's in your eye, unless it's inside you, right? So it's a matter of perspective. So what could a beam in your eye look like in the real world? It could be the bitterness that you're carrying around regarding a former spouse or a former boyfriend or girlfriend. It could be anything like that. You know, it's interesting that scripture that, you know, the person who will not forgive, in him lieth the greater sin. I mean, it's telling us that it's inside us. And so our sins really aren't black marks on a heavenly tally sheet, you know, something that's out away from us. The difficulty is it's what lives inside us, really. And I think that that's a big part of the parable of the mote and the beam. It's something that's actually in your eye, not sitting out here someplace.
And, you know, I've never seen it that way. And I think it's fascinating, this new way of thinking about it. And I think it rings true for me. In that something's only a problem for me if it's in me. It's not
Right.
a problem if it's out there.
Right. So forgiveness is a big
gift we give ourselves by letting go of what is disrupting our shalom.
And how do we let go of it?
Sometimes we have to give it to God. Sometimes we aren't capable of it on our own. We
Right.
need help.
Maybe next slide. One thing that can cause us to have hearts at war toward other people. This is something we touch on in our book, and it's something that I learned a lot from, both in experiences with a loved one and reading the book, The Anatomy of Peace. But we objectify other people by viewing them either as a means to an end, someone who can take us where we want to go, or as someone stopping us or blocking us from what we want. And if you ponder that for a minute, it's easy to see how, you know, in my early period of being separated from my first wife, how I viewed her as someone who was blocking me from having what I wanted. And it's very easy to do either one or both of those things with a dating partner. And one thing I had to learn, even in my mid-single dating journey, let's suppose there's a woman I really care about, was dating, and she decides to go a different direction. Well, that's hard. I mean, a lot of you have experienced that. Cathy and I have both been there. But the principle we have to remember is it's important to see people, as children of God, and not as a means to an end or something blocking what we want. And that means that Cathy is more important than my agenda for her. And thus, I have to honor her agency. Now, she did break up with me at one point, and it was really painful. And we stayed broken up for about a year, although we remained friends. But
We had to work through that, huh?
yeah, ultimately, it's something that if my feelings for that person are true, and I truly care, then I'm going to honor their agency, even if I think it's totally foolish what they're doing, even if I think, oh, you don't see the potential we have and I do, whatever your thinking might be. Dating is a really great place to practice with understanding that other people have their agency and not to objectify them, not to put them as a person above them as what you picture them being, your future husband or wife, or that who they are as a child of God is above all of that.
Yeah, and that's certainly important in dating relationships, because they don't always work out. And when they don't work out, how are we going to handle it? Are we going to do so with grace and kindness, and or are we going to get upset and make it harder for ourselves and our dating partners? But it continues in marriage. I mean, we always have to remind ourselves when we might be going into a state of objectification, right?
Right. Maybe you could talk a little bit more, because Cathy has some very developed thoughts on breaking up, or what she calls more kindly transitioning.
Transitioning, yes. That's how I like to see it, because I don't know. I don't like to think of people as breaking. I think it can feel victimizing to be dumped. I don't like to be a dumper. I would prefer to treat everyone I date with respect and be able to transition those relationships to something else that's healthy, that we both can agree to. Of course, that doesn't always work. Doing the friend zone thing doesn't always work for everyone, but when it can be lovely. And I made good friends with several people I dated, even to the point where we attended one of their weddings, and we work in a business with one of them. And Jeff has stepped in and become friends with them too.
Yeah, one of Cathy's former boyfriends attended our wedding.
Mm-hmm.
He had become friends with me by then as well.
And another one of them actually married my best friend, because he stuck around as a friend, and he got that blessing of being with my best friend, who's amazing. And they're perfect for each other. I think really the only reason he came into my life was to come into hers anyway. So you never know when, a transitioned relationship to a good friendship can lead to something else wonderful.
And I will tell you this, I am generally not a huge fan of the friend zone, and we can, knock that idea around a little more after the presentation when we're talking back and forth. But the reason why I have generally felt that way is that I think there's always one person in that friend relationship, or almost always, who really would prefer that it be more. And that person's always in a little bit of pain. And I just most of the time thought, I don't want to put myself through that. Now, I did make an exception with Cathy, and part of the reason was the biggest part of the reason really was I thought, we had connected initially over personal development. And so we spent time reading the Book of Mormon and sending each other comments, and, reading books and watching inspirational videos. And we shared those things, and I got a lot from it. And Cathy agreed, at least implicitly, to a boundary that I had, which is, I don't want to hear about anyone you're dating. I don't want to be around when you're with anybody you're dating. And we observed that for the entire year.
Well, and wouldn't you say also that I gave you your space for a few months?
Oh, yeah. But in the beginning, we didn't talk for like 3 months.
I pretty much left it up to you to decide when and how much you wanted to communicate.
Right. But whatever you feel about the friend zone, and I think, approach that if you're going to consider it prayerfully, and don't invest more in that relationship than the other person is willing to invest. Now, I think in my relationship with Cathy, I did think there was a very remote chance that we might date again, but I thought it was improbable. But I always felt like we had potential.
And believe it or not, him being my friend, like sincerely, for that year is really the only reason we could, or even have that potential possibility, because I needed to know first and foremost the person I ended up with was was a friend regardless of our romantic interests in each other.
Maybe you could,
I just needed that. I know I needed that.
maybe you could explain also kind of what was happening at the end of 2017 with your health and everything, and sort of the weeding out.
Oh, well, I think that goes to a screen, doesn't it? I think there's a,
Yeah, but
Let's
we,
go-
well, no, we
no,
won't get to it till
not
later. Yeah, but go ahead and tell the
all
story.
right, okay. So just in a nutshell, I got really sick around Thanksgiving of 2017. And I was dating quite a few men and interested in several. And
They couldn't diagnose this, by the way.
I didn't get an accurate diagnosis
while.
for over a year. But I know I had strep, and I knew that I got bronchitis after that, and thrush. And then, like, after 6 weeks of upper respiratory stuff, my stomach started blowing up like a balloon. And that had never happened before. And I thought it was the strangest, weirdest thing. And a simple doctor visit didn't do much, even after, well, anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Being sick that long, it was interesting to see which men kind of went away because they're like, oh, you're not available to date and have fun with. And which of them showed up with soup. And,
Me.
yeah, yeah, Jeff was one of them. There were quite a few that did, though. I mean, and those are the times when you get to know the people you're dating that are not fair weather dating partners.
Interestingly, Cathy had a short rebound with her health shortly before we got married, and we took a trip to Africa to visit her sister, and it was like the most romantic thing either of us ever did.
We got engaged on a safari.
Yeah, so that was so fun. And we'll never forget that trip. I mean, it was so amazing.
It was.
But
I still had to turn down 2 really good men who showed up with soup. And
one of them married her best friend.
Yeah, yep, one of them did marry my best friend. They're great guys, and they were very supportive when I made the decision to go with Jeff. But I mean, all of them knew I wasn't exclusive with anyone, and I was still deciding. It was really hard to decide, though, when my brain was like all mushy with sickness, But that's what I had to rely on the Spirit a lot for that. Yeah, and I even had some spiritual complications with the extended illness into our marriage. But at least at that time, because I'd been going to the temple regularly and I felt like I had a really good spiritual foundation. The spirit, my access to the Spirit continued for several, I would say probably at least 6 months to a year into the illness that lasted like 3 years.
Yeah,
but
really,
eventually my spiritual reserves ran out, and that was really scary for me.
For the first couple of years we were married, she was pretty sick and like crying on the floor every night with both hugely awful back pain and then the stomach blowing up like she talked about and all these yucky symptoms. And I went from being a single guy to a stepfather of 2 and doing most of the housework and childcare because she couldn't really.
Which is odd because I love doing housework and I'm always on top of things. But I lacked energy so much. I could hardly like stand. Like, remember how you had to actually like walk me to the bathroom. Like I could not even hardly stand. I had no energy at all.
Now, in retrospect, there is a point to all this. One is that, as Cathy, I think already has said, but I think it bears repeating, the guys who stuck around for her were the key, the ones you'd consider being keepers. The ones that sort of faded away, maybe not so much.
Yeah, it was kind of like, okay, that was fun, but.
And then having a 2-year illness shortly after we were married, I mean, within a week or 2, it really hit hard.
I was in the hospital, like, getting all these diagnoses, right? Like within a month or something.
Yeah. We both have been divorced twice. And we came into our marriage with some real trauma and some real trust issues. And
even though we'd done a lot of personal growth,
Yeah.
you know, and we'd done a lot of therapy and
Right, lots of personal development, but I think what that did for us is it built trust in a way that smooth sailing couldn't have. Because I think the strength of your love is not tested when everything's hunky-dory. It's tested when things are really tough. And from the beginning, for a couple of years, it was really hard. And, you know, I think it gave both of us more trust that we could get through things together and be loyal and faithful. And, you know,
that was certainly the advantage. But I think we were sometimes really mad too, that we were like, you know, that honeymoon period was like taken from us.
Right.
So we're in that now. we took it when it came. Right?
Right. So anyway, that's, you know, I think that's another example of how from a tragedy comes something beautiful. And we can't always see it when we're in the middle of it because it's so painful or difficult. So Carly, how about that next slide? All right. There is a story behind this picture that you're seeing. I took this picture driving across the New Mexico desert. I had driven out to Utah for a trip when I was living in Texas, partly to see a girl. And we had been corresponding online for a long time. She was one of my little sister's best friends. And it seemed really promising. I felt like we had this really good connection, like that I've only had with a few people, Cathy being obviously one of those. But I really was looking forward to seeing her. And she decided at the last minute, when I was already almost to Utah, that she wasn't going to see me. And why is a long story. It wasn't anything I did, but she wasn't ready and so forth. So that was hard. And as I'm driving across this beautiful desert landscape in New Mexico, I felt my heart sort of relax into what I now call my shalom. To just say, okay, her agency and her status as a child of God is more important than my agenda for her. And if this is what she's chosen, I'm going to give her credit for making her decision in good faith and making the best one she can. And so radical acceptance is what we call this. That means to completely accept things as they are and realizing that resistance is not going to change it. And that is, of course, something we know in the Serenity Prayer, whose author has been lost to history. But, you know, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. You could easily reverse that. God help me accept the things I cannot change so that I can have serenity. The second thing is don't judge it. You want to talk about that one?
Yeah, judgment tends to prolong the frustration we might be tempted to feel at another person's choices. If we can give them the benefit of the doubt that they're trying to do the best thing for themselves. And I think we tend to judge ourselves less harshly when we offer that to others.
Right. I think there tends to be this sense that if we've had a loss, it wasn't supposed to be this way. I married in the temple for eternity. And really that judgment that something is wrong, that the cosmos is out of balance, that things are not as they should be, that something has gone dreadfully wrong in our life. That's a painful thought. And like Cathy said, it magnifies the pain. Mm-hmm. And that's what one of the biggest things I didn't get when I was going through the grief of my divorce.
Oh, yeah, you and I both.
Several years of pain because of this thought, it's not supposed to be this way. Something's gone wrong. And radical acceptance is accepting that this is my path, that a loving Father and Mother in heaven have plans for us that are more glorious than the ones we had, that they're going to clothe us with glory like God clothes the lilies of the field. And then, of course, we focus on the things we have the power to change. And that's, you have a story about radical acceptance also, I think.
I do. So it's interesting because I didn't get exclusive very easily when I was dating. I would generally just date a lot of people. And I had to feel really good about the possibility of moving it towards a marriage deed exclusive, because otherwise I wanted to keep my options open, right? So, but I did find myself in a situation where I was needing to choose. And so I chose someone. And as soon as I chose that person, he backed out. And I just basically let go of everyone else. And I was like, what? And I didn't like very much how he did it. I was very tempted to judge the situation and get all upset and frustrated and spend days ruminating about it. And then I remembered the same person telling me that plants are amazing. He was showing me a plant, like a tree in his yard. And he was saying, we give plants fertilizer and it's like technically like poison. And they basically take that poison and create life out of it. And so I was in the fall, and I saw my flaming red maple outside, a tree that I had at my home. And I went and picked one of those leaves, and I still have this leaf. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to take the situation that could be poisonous to me and create love and life. And I just radically accepted it. And I did not ruminate. I did not lose time or energy to it. I just moved on. And that was really powerful.
One thing I think also about this, Cathy and I each lost a spouse. We each lost a sibling to a death at a pretty young age. My brother was 17. I think her sister was 19 or something like that.
Yeah, a lot of our life paralleled each other. We each had two boys, about 3.5 years apart. We each lost a same-sex sibling, youngest sibling.
Yeah, and that was very hard.
Right around the time of our firstborn child, too.
Right.
Yeah.
But to illustrate this idea, it's okay to feel pain when you lose someone. And like my brother, if I say, hey, I miss him, he was such a huge part of my life, and having him gone leaves a hole. I feel that's clean pain.
Yeah, in fact, you want to feel that, right?
You want to feel that, and you want to grieve your losses. Where you get into trouble with it is when you judge it and say, he was too young to die. It wasn't supposed to be this way. And so, again, the same thing. So we're not telling you radical acceptance and don't grieve. We're talking about radical acceptance and feel the pain, but don't judge it. Don't make it look like, God has made a mistake here somewhere, and I've departed from the path that I was supposed to be on.
And as often as possible, if I tried not to let it take over my life, I heal faster.
Could we get the next slide? All right. A few thoughts about approaching others for purposes of dating. we were both mid-single for quite a while, and we both saw all kinds of crazy gimmicks and scheming that people tried to find love without risk. And I'm telling you, it is not possible. There are certain natural laws, and Dr. Stephen Covey used to talk about how you can't break them, you can only break yourself against them, and this is one of those. You have to risk rejection to find love, and if it just falls in your lap, it's because the other person took the risk.
Right.
But
So
it takes,
there could be an illusion of no risk, but it's still there.
right. And I know so many people who will say, I've tried dating, I've tried being proactive, and it never works. Well, it only works once. It always doesn't work until it does. And my experience is that persistence pays off for the vast majority of people. And there may be someone who, has somebody else persist after them, and it works, but I think even that can be kind of rare. So the first thing is realize that the fear, the risk is normal. We all felt it. We all feel it when we are about to approach someone we like or think we might like. So the thing is, don't stand on the edge of the high dive looking down, contemplating the jump. That's terrifying. Take a flying leap off the edge, get it over with. Don't worry about speaking the right words or being smooth. When we say don't lay a foundation, that just means don't spend weeks or months trying to develop some kind of friendship before. Just ask the person out. Just say, I'd like to get to know you. Could we go get a soda sometime?
Yeah, just lay just enough of a foundation to feel safe and comfortable meeting with the person in public.
But the more you invest before you actually open up the possibility of romance, the harder and more afraid you're going to feel
to close the gap.
Yeah, to finally make that invitation. Realize too, an invitation is for one evening. It's not an indication that someone's really serious about you right now. It doesn't mean they're a player if they date someone else the next night or the next weekend. Let's keep it low key and low pressure and say, we're going to get to know each other, and if we have fun, we'll do it again. So that's another one. And then, of course, be positive and friendly, positive and happy. It's tempting sometimes if you get two divorcees together on a date and they have somebody that understands. That's a bad way to spend a first date, though. It kind of leaves you with a bad taste in your mouth. And it kind of indicates that you haven't really moved on. And it's hard to find a new love when you're embroiled in the battles of a former relationship.
Well, and another way in which you can be positive besides trying to avoid that pitfall is to recognize that you're not for everyone. And if you are ever turned down for a date, that it's nothing personal and it's not something you need to feel terribly bad about.
Right.
I think that gives you bravery to be able to take that leap off the dive board, high board, or the dive. The high dive, knowing that there's soft water to land on, because you don't. I think as long as you know you don't have to take it personally and you choose not to, there's the risk is more lightened for you.
Yeah. All right. Can we have the next slide? Okay, as relationships start to become more serious and you both kind of are acknowledging that you're starting to have some feelings for each other, vulnerability becomes increasingly important. And I'd like to read you a passage from our book, but it's actually a quote from Elder Holland. But I love it. on this subject. He says, oh, wait. Sorry, I turned to the wrong page for a second. To give ourselves so totally to another person is the most trusting and perhaps the most faithful step we take in life. It seems such a risk and such an act of faith. None of us walking toward the altar would seem to have the confidence to reveal everything that we are, all our hopes, all our fears, all our dreams, all our weaknesses to another person. Safety and good sense in this world's experience suggest that we hang back a little, that we not wear our heart on our sleeve, where it can be so easily hurt by one who knows so much about us. We fear, as Zechariah prophesied of Christ, that we will be wounded in the house of our friends. This is going to be particularly true of those of us who have been through divorces or painful relationship losses. But no marriage is really worth the name, at least not in the sense that God expects us to be married, if we do not fully invest all that we have and all that we are in this other person who has been bound to us through the power of the holy priesthood. Only when we are willing to totally share life does God find us worthy to give life. Paul's analogy for this complete commitment was that of Christ and the church. Could Christ, even in his most vulnerable moments in Gethsemane or Calvary, hold back? In spite of what hurt might be in it, could he fail to give all that he was and all that he had for the salvation of his bride, his church, his followers, those who would take upon them his name, even as in a marriage vow? And so I love that. And I believe that that is the key to progressing in relationships. It's scary if we've been hurt before. Profoundly scary sometimes. But think of it this way too. You don't want to get into a marriage based on a mask you're wearing and never know if that other person loves you for the mask or loves what's really in your heart. And Cathy and I both had moments in our relationship. One of mine was really actually pretty early, where I wrote her a letter about how insecure I felt. It wasn't an easy thing for me to do, but I thought it would help to share it. And if I did, and she could accept it, she could accept me. And there were things like that going the other way, particularly one time late in our relationship when we were deciding to date for marriage.
Kind of early and late.
Yeah.
I shared some things that weren't flattering.
Right.
Because there's no way I wanted to ever wonder if it's not fair to anyone to not share important details about your life and your experience that, if you think that they might not choose you, they have a right to choose you based on the truth, right? They deserve that. That's respectful. And it's also self-respecting too, to say, hey, look at me, all of me. And if you can accept me for who I am, then we really got something. Right.
And that, so I think in a nutshell, there's a lot more in our book and a lot more that we teach on this, but the essence of it is you progress in relationships as you become more and more vulnerable. And again, this is one of those things that you got to risk, like Elder Holland said. It's not, you're not going to find the love that you want without doing that. And it's scary. I know it's scary, but on the other side of that is the greatest blessing you will ever have in time and eternity, other than the atonement of Christ himself. And so it's worth the risk. Make yourself vulnerable, open yourself up. If you get hurt, radical acceptance, seek your shalom.
Support from God himself.
Right. Grieve, but don't judge it. and then move on to the next possibility. All right, can we have the next slide?
Oh, we are at time, but we definitely
Yep.
want to share those slides real quick. If
Yeah,
that's
well,
okay.
these
They're pretty
next ones
much
should
really
be
fast. Yeah.
Now, most of you probably know about this. It again repeats the theme we began this presentation with. When the Provo City Center Temple was the Provo Tabernacle, it burned and it looks like a tragedy. And it rose from the ashes because of deliberate intentions of church members and leaders to make it so. And we were blessed by God that it was salvageable. And it's the crown jewel of Provo now. I mean, it is where we chose to get married because it symbolizes the restoration we've both had in our lives. Okay, the next slide. Now, does this look like a tragedy? Was it a tragedy that I got laid off from my corporate job and divorced for the second time in 2015? Was it a tragedy that Cathy got divorced for the second time in 2015? Was it a tragedy that Cathy had an extended illness in 2017 and several men she liked stopped coming around? I think, and I hope you can see it now, those quote unquote tragedies led to the greatest blessings we have.
That and many other tragedies, actually.
Right.
What we thought were, for sure.
And so when you contemplate what you've been through, your marriages, past dating relationships, past lack of dating relationships, whatever.
Past career changes, all of it.
Yeah, disappointments in your career, whatever. Understand that, you know, like it says in the book of Romans, all things work together for them that love God.
And that's an important one to remember. Next slide.
I think that's the last one, isn't it?
Oh,
yeah.
That's our last slide.
So go ahead and take a photo or a screenshot or whatever of this. That tells you how to find our book and our podcast. You can also email us if you want. We'd also love it if you search for our group on Facebook and join us. We have a very positive group and I think you'd enjoy it. And
our website, loveinlateryears.com, has a place where you can find out about all our services. In fact, Jeff is a wonderful writer, and he, a lot of his, what we call Lily Gems, are on our website. You can, it's like a whole book online for free, basically, and they're wonderful. You can also sign up for our Lily letter and, you know, find our podcast and our YouTube channel and all that.
Yeah. So we don't want to belabor that.
Yeah.
We want you to feel like you have value, whether you buy our book or listen to our podcast or anything. But if you want more of our wisdom, these are some places you can go. And we are open for questions, comments, you know, discussion. We'd love to hear what you have to say.
Just go ahead and raise your hands, or well, we'll see how many people have questions, but you can go ahead and raise your hands and we'll call on you if you have any questions. Or you can put it in the chat as well. No questions.
Let's see in the chat.
Yes, Carly looks amazing in red. I was just thinking that.
I feel like I relate more to Job right now and trying to be like Paul. This is Jennifer Davis. Are you still here, Jennifer? Do you want to talk to us about that? Whatever you feel you can share in front of the group. Don't feel pressured to share anything you don't want. You're muted still.
Jennifer, you're still muted.
It's yeah. There's just many times where sorry. So yeah, it's been fairly new. 26 years married. It's my second marriage. So I felt like we were doing pretty good. But just one argument and he was out the door. So we moved out of our house, sold it to pay off debts. We moved into an RV until we were gonna build our dream house, and then he moved out with our 2 girls who were living in an RV with us. Anyway, there's just times where I feel like I've lost quite a bit, and but trying to be like Paul and trying to see the joy in the purpose in this decision that my ex-husband made. And it's really hard sometimes.
You're in the thick of it.
I'd like
What's
to,
that? But I feel like probably like you did. I felt for like 3 months like my heart was being literally ripped out of my chest. Because when he left, I mean, I still loved him. I still, felt like things could be worked out, but I also know that people are at different levels and can process things differently and can forgive differently too, or not be able to forgive. And so I had to work through that because I don't know that I ever felt bitter. I got on a few Facebook pages with women who had been LDS, I won't even say, that who had been divorced, and I just had to get off of it because I said I may feel bitter sometimes, but that's not where I want to stay. And so I'm trying to, yeah, anyway, so I feel like there's a lot of things that I've lost because I have been struggling with health issues for a really long time. And a lot of our troubles and arguments were because I didn't have, like, I was struggling. I was so sick that my brain couldn't handle mental stress a lot of times, and it would get really bad. And I would say, hey, I can't do this right now. And but it didn't seem that there was a support system behind that. And so with that, my anxieties and things would get worse, and that's kind of what pushed him out the door. And anyway, so I don't even know where I'm going with any of this, and I don't know if I have a specific question. I just know that there have been times where I felt like I've pretty much lost everything, and there's really not anymore. I'm doing pretty well now, but I think it's funny that I have the whole Job, and now I'm like trying to be like Paul. Okay, let's just look at it a different way,
well,
And
Jennifer,
so, yeah,
let me first compliment you on one thing.
yeah,
You talked about how you've had to get off certain groups on Facebook because you feel negative. And, we preach the law of attraction in the context of the law of the harvest, that we reap what we sow, that whatever we focus on, we're going to get more of it. And,
right.
And so intentionally choosing your thoughts, which ones to keep and which ones not to. We call our book Intentional Courtship for a reason. We want
Yeah.
to be intentional about the thoughts we're choosing as one part of this. So I think you're on the right track with that. I want to read you another little passage from this book, and this is written by yours truly. If Satan, the adversary of family life and happiness, has convinced you that your life and even your soul is so broken that it cannot ever be as pure and joyful as it was, remember who you are and what you have been anointed to become. The powerful teaching of the book of Job is that you can be faithful to God through severe suffering, start fresh, and be blessed twice as much as before. I echo the great testimony of Paul that I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. Philippians 4:13. I have seen this, I have lived it. I testify that it is true. On May 11th, 2018, I knelt at the altar in the Provo City Center Temple, itself a symbol of beauty and power, rising like a phoenix from the ashes of destruction, and looked into the eyes of my stunning bride, surrounded by loved ones on both sides of the veil, and started my life over at age 50. I was overwhelmed by the abundant gifts that had been restored to me by a loving Father in heaven. In that moment, I shed tears of gratitude for the exceptional woman kneeling with me at the altar, for her belief in me, her love, and the sacred promises we were making to each other. In that moment, I was grateful beyond words that neither of us had given up on the dream and taken an easier path. I thought again about the biblical story of Job, because the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. And that's how I feel, like the Lord gave me twice as much as I had before. If you're
I've had some, sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to
if you're
interrupt.
in the thick of it, you can believe that God knows where he's taking you.
And I have been, I have some really good friends who have, especially one, she just keeps saying, you know, the hardships that you go through, as hard as it is, it's going to be equally as good on the other side, wherever that other side comes out. And I have, like I said, it's still fresh. So sometimes when I talk about it, it's really hard, but I've progressed over the last few months, but I'm definitely nowhere ready to, I still need to do some work for myself, you know,
That's
before,
okay.
but I felt like I needed to be on this FHE tonight. I was just like, when I get to that point, I'd like to know what I'm supposed to be doing. But I mean, not get to that point. It's a work in progress, right? So anyway, I did have a question about the not a question per se, but just the radical acceptance slide. I was trying to write it down and I forgot I could just like slide to swipe to like take a picture, and so I didn't get the last few lines on it, and I was kind of hoping that you guys could pop that back up on the screen as well for a second.
That's okay with me, Carly, if
Carly's
you
on
want
it.
to pop that up again.
But I appreciate you taking my comment. I was trying to be silly because I have felt like I've lost a lot of things over the last few months, but I also feel like there's hope, I guess. And there have been moments of, just one second, I'm going to take a picture. There we go. There have been moments where I'm like, I just don't even see any point in this anymore. My eternal family's broken.
And
So I'm still working through that one because I have a child who won't talk to me. My kids are all adults, pretty much. Our youngest is a senior in high school, but yeah, it's really hard when one of them won't talk to you because they think that, like their dad does, that it's all your fault. And yeah, so that's the worst one for me.
Cathy can tell you, I have a son who almost didn't talk to me at all for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Now he calls me 2 or 3 times a week, if not 2 or 3 times a day sometimes.
But he didn't know if that would ever happen.
I didn't know that. I'm so grateful for it,
Right.
that we have the relationship we have now. But
What would you say helped? I mean, what did
radical
you do?
acceptance.
Okay.
Because my tendency would have been to start pushing him to call me and trying to shame him into calling me, and trying to push that, and that would have just pushed him further away. But accepting that this is his choice and he has a right to make it, and I'm just open to love him and pray for him and be there when he decides he wants me in his life. And thankfully he did decide that on his own.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now. I've kind of, her 20th birthday was this last Saturday, And I always took my kids out to like a birthday lunch or dinner, and she didn't want to go. And so that was true. That was hard for me, but I'm like, it's not about me. It's about her healing the way she needs to heal and fix what she needs to fix so that she can feel like she can have a relationship with me again. So I just told her, I said, you don't have to come with me. I sincerely want to respect your wishes. And so that's where we're at with that. But yeah, it's hard when it's your children. Yeah, thank you. I don't,
course.
yeah, no else to
Yes,
say, but
with everything.
Have you ever heard the Orson F. Whitney quote?
probably, but it's not coming to mind right now.
Someone, if you have another question or comment, can go ahead, but I'll look up the Orson F. Whitney quote because it's so great.
And I don't know what happened, but that slide didn't get saved. I tried, and it was your guys' picture. It wasn't the slide. So, oh, thank you, Carly. You're so sweet. I'm going to try this again. Okay, thank you. I got it.
Anybody else?
I'm going to turn off my video now.
Oh, it was nice to see you.
Um,
Anybody else have any questions?
Thank you, guys.
Welcome.
so here's Orson F. Whitney, and this is a quote I think Jennifer will like. Orson F. Whitney, who was an apostle, said, "The prophet Joseph Smith declared, and he never taught a more comforting doctrine, that the eternal sealings of faithful parents and the divine promises made to them for valiant service in the cause of truth would save not only themselves, but likewise their posterity. Though some sheep may wander, the eye of the shepherd is upon them, and sooner or later they will feel the tentacles of divine providence reaching out after them and drawing them back to the fold. In this life or the life to come, they will return. They will have to pay their debt to justice. They will suffer for their sins and may tread a thorny path. But if it leads them at last, like the penitent prodigal, to a loving and forgiving father's heart and home, the painful experience will not have been." Here, you read the rest.
Will not have been in vain. Pray for your careless and disobedient children. Hold on to them with your faith. Hope on, trust on, till you see the salvation of God.
That was conference report in 1929. So anyway, what other comments, questions, thoughts do you have?
Noah, you were unmuted. Were you trying to say something? You just wanted to be unmuted.
Thanks for sharing your experiences. I really enjoyed listening to your presentation.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Hi, hey, I had one comment. Are you still there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm Cheryl. Hey, I just had a comment when you were talking about radical acceptance. I think we've all been through heartbreak, and or you've broken someone else's heart. It's gone both ways. And but when it happens to you and you are in the thick of it, how do you radically accept, and with the emotions still stirring, like how is there anything you do mentally or physically to literally help the heartbreak, when that happens? Because I think that's sometimes why we fear so much to even get involved in the first place. If there isn't this perfect person that's sitting in front of us, well, there's never a perfect person. We're not perfect either. So we're always trying to work out all these little different things, but we're like, okay, well, if we go forward with this person, I could really get hurt, or I could really hurt them. So how do you when you do get hurt, you know, what are some things you do mentally to like radically accept that you need to move on? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing is all of those principles of radical acceptance. And one of those things we radically accept is I'm hurting and I'm going to hurt for a while. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to hurt forever. But if you hurt, it's kind of like President Nelson said, you cannot take the sorrow out of death without taking the love out of life. You cannot take the sorrow out of divorce without taking the love out of marriage. You know, you could think of all kinds of applications of that, but
yeah, so radical acceptance won't totally eliminate that sorrow that is part of loving.
But it will, in my experience, much shorten the duration of the pain.
Yeah.
Right. So when you feel that pain, what do you say to yourself at that moment? Are you just like, okay, I'm just moving on, or okay, I feel like this, and like, is there any kind of self-talk that you do?
Absolutely.
This is part of the plan for my life. Like, I think definitely accepting that everything that happens is for a reason and that it's leading somewhere good. It gives us hope, and it also puts our focus on what can be, like what good can come from the loss. So I think that, and then also self-care. I think you've got to be really kind to yourself. So, you know, if you notice you're panicking in your heart and your heart is feeling like really flustered, I think you got to like do something to like calm yourself down. Maybe an Epsom salt bath, or, you know, some aromatherapy, maybe a walk. A walk is great. Walks are wonderful stress relievers. So I would say self-care and then the self-talk of it's part of the plan. And give it to God too, because that sometimes when it hurts so bad, like when you're really in the thick of it, that's all you can do. I mean, I remember having to give it to God a few times, like, because it just hurt so much, especially after my first marriage ended. It was like 14-year marriage. It's really hard.
I would add two things to that. And I love what Cathy just said. One thing I would add to it, which we kind of touched on earlier, is it's okay to feel the pain, but realize the pain isn't wrong. It's not evil. It just is. And accept the fact that I'm hurting and I'm going to hurt for a little while over this, but I'm also going to recognize that that other person, if it's a decision they made, that either you decided you needed to walk away from the relationship or they made the decision to walk away. Even if I think it's a dumb reason, even if she said, no, I've always dreamed of having a blue-eyed husband and I got brown eyes, and I think that's the dumbest reason I can possibly think of to walk away from a relationship, understanding and really honoring agency that, you know, even our former spouses, I may think it was a mistake to walk away, but at the same time, I understand it was a mistake they had every right to make, and I can't interfere with it. And so I think part of it is that too, just God honors agency.
That kind of helps, because I think some people I've had it both ways, where I want more closure. I want to know why, I want to know whatever. And it's happened the other way too, where it's like, someone's asking me, but why? It was so good, or it was so this, you know, what do you mean you don't want to go out anymore? Or, you know, so I think radical acceptance can kind of just help you, for me, like kind of help to not have so many issues with closure, you know, just move on, because why rehash it, you know?
Right. And we're telling you, and I mean, this is hard doctrine, if you will, but we're telling you, yeah, go take the risk to ask people out and go on, you know, develop relationships, then be vulnerable and open your heart to people and try them on for size and see how it works being vulnerable, if you have a connection and all that. And then if you get your heart broken because of all of that, radical acceptance. And I realize that's not as neat and clean as maybe we present it, but I do think there's truth in all of that too.
No, in fact, it's very messy. Life is messy, right? The new definition of the narrow straits. Have you guys ever heard of like the straight and narrow is actually spelled differently than the word straight? Like we always thought it was like a straight path.
Like a direct path.
It's not. It's actually a very dangerous, like very narrow, windy path around danger.
Like the Strait of Gibraltar or the Straits of Magellan. It's a narrow passage.
Yeah. So I'm sure many of you can relate to the fact that if we're on a straight and narrow path, it is messy. That's life.
And that straight path may not literally be straight as in direct. It may wind all over the place and take you in between tight spaces between the devil and the deep blue sea. And that doesn't mean you're not on the straight path. So if you had a divorce and feel like Jennifer talked about her feeling like her eternal family had broken up, that is your path. And it may seem to have taken a detour, but it really didn't. You're going through one of those straits.
Okay, well, it is 9 o'clock. Any other last burning questions before we have closing prayer? All right, well, thank you guys so much. This was great. We're gonna have Sierra do our closing prayer, and then we will introduce our new people and do announcements. And then if you guys just have a couple more minutes, I wanted to know what was in your book a little bit more. So, but I know Sierra has to go to bed early. So we'll go ahead and have our closing prayer real quick.
Our dearest Father in heaven, we are grateful for the opportunity that we have through technology to gather together and to one another. We're presentation, the experiences that they want to share. And we pray that we can remember the things that they've shared and know when to implement them in our lives. We love the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
All right. Thank you, Sierra.
So Carly, it's called Intentional Courtship, and the subtitle is A Mid-Singles Guide to Peace, Progress, and Pairing Up in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And you can see this is kind of a thick book. We wanted to write sort of a comprehensive manual because when we became mid-singles, we wished there was a book like this, and there just wasn't. I mean, there still isn't much out there. So I'll show you the table of contents.
There's 190 references to really great books and
Scriptures. Well, more if you count the scriptures, because they're actually.
Oh yeah, some scriptures aren't referenced other than in the text.
So it's divided into three subsections: peace, progress, and pairing up. Under peace, where to begin. I'm just going to read you the chapter titles. Where to begin, what's in the way, overcoming fear, challenges mid-singles face in the church, unique challenges of mid-single Latter-day Saint women, unique challenges of mid-single Latter-day Saint men, personal development, finding peace and Christ-like love, personal development, authenticity for dating success.
And those are the first 8 chapters. And that's what you would focus on if you're in the thick of it with a relationship loss. I mean, that is reestablishing your shalom.
Okay.
And then the second part, progress, adventures in dating, online dating, the wild west of mid-single life, approaching someone special, A first date is arranged, now what? Courtship and the law of attraction, healthy relational transitioning, our adventures in dating, which is just sort of, that last one is just sort of a fun little chapter where we shared some of the wild experiences we had dating. And then part 3, pairing up, getting serious. The chapters are relationship development and progress, your children's role in your dating life, the role of physical affection in mid-single dating, the list of qualities you are looking for, deciding who to date and eventually marry, and chapter 20, the last chapter, is part 1 is rough starts are beginning. Part 2, 20 seconds of insane courage. So that's the whole table of contents.
Nice.
And there's a foreword by Laura Brotherson. I don't know if you know who she is, but she wrote a best-selling book called, well, she's written several, but the first one was called And They Were Not Ashamed. Any other questions about the book or anything else we talked about?
That podcast, Carly, that you've been listening to, Lily Pod,
Mhm.
we're about to launch LilyTube. So it's going to be like Lily Pod, but like short, instructional, like helpful content videos on YouTube. So we have a YouTube link or a link to our YouTube channel online, and we do have 40 videos there now, but we're going to actually be like kind of doing a new and improved and LilyTube, kind of like Lily Pod, but short little snippets of video that are going to be really helpful.
Fun.
Jennifer says she can't wait to find and get the book, and we're excited for you to get it and to hear what your thoughts on it. So
Will you guys be doing it as a an Audible?
we will eventually, yes.
We've been reading the chapters into our podcast mic, and we will be putting that together in the near future. It's a long book, so we're still making our way through it.
Right
Yeah.
now, it's available in hardcover and as a
ebook.
Kindle format.
Very cool.
Did
Very
that answer your questions? Do you have any other questions about the book?
So would you say that it's more for people that are currently not dating?
No.
No, it's for anyone that it wants to date but doesn't feel ready, all the way up to people who are dating and
Engaged to be engaged. Because the last section is all about relationship development and really honing in your skills for developing that relationship that can then lead to intentional marriage. So, and then also honing in your thoughts on, okay, what am I looking for? What do I want to create in the future with a partner? And, is that something that I have with whoever, I'm.
Let me give you an example of what I think Cathy's talking about. When we think of intention, we're talking about doing something deliberately, not just letting things happen, right?
Mhm.
And there are certain tendencies that we all have that are super unhealthy. And we may have tendencies, relationship tendencies, where we have trauma from past relationships or childhood or whatever. And I mean, virtually every mid-single that I've gotten to know well, including me, had trauma. And so you're likely to get emotionally flooded. And when you do, you're in fight or flight, and you're not listening anymore to what the other person's saying or whatever. And so, interesting point, and this is in the book, but the Gottmans, John and Julie Gottman, did studies where they had people discuss relationship problems hooked up to all kinds of things that measured their vital signs. They found out that anytime one person in a couple or both had a heart rate that reached over 100 beats per minute, after that point, there was a 0% chance that they resolved it. 0. And that's because when you're over 100 beats per minute, you're flooded. And
that applied to exercise too.
oh yeah, even if they were
Interestingly.
exercising, they
You
couldn't.
didn't even have to be upset. It's like just whenever your heart rate's that high, it's just no good. Not a good time to resolve anything.
Right. And so what will happen if you let nature take its course is either someone starts stonewalling and just says, I refuse to participate in this conversation with you, or they'll fight. And some of you that have been married know that those fights can go on all night long. And what you do instead is you make an agreement together with your loved one. And I suggest making these while dating too, but especially as you're exploring marriage with someone. Make agreements like either one of us can call time out at any point during a discussion if we feel that we are flooded or the other person is. And and when they call time out, there's no last words, no parting shots, no, it ends right then. But implicit in that agreement is you come back no less than 20 minutes later, generally no more than a few hours. And, we have found most of the time when we do that, we can resolve something in 5-10 minutes. And instead of having an all-night fight where bitter things are said, where people say things they don't mean or threaten divorce or, and so part of being intentional is making agreements like that. And there's all kinds of different agreements you can make that will help out in building a future marriage. But we really think that begins in courtship, where you're kind of practicing for marriage and you're setting up those agreements to help you manage the potential landmines in your relationship.
Yep. And I just wanted to mention, since we still have a lot of people on the call, so obviously people are interested in this, EMDR is helpful. In fact, Jeff and I, when we, how we mentioned that when we were first married, like we had all this trauma and we still had things to work through together. Instead of doing marriage therapy, we each went and did EMDR sessions, and all the stuff that we couldn't talk about without trauma coming up just melted. And, and ever since, it's it's almost like, could you see ourselves being like little children that couldn't handle a simple, very straightforward, basic conversation about something very simple, right?
Oh yeah, our EMDR therapist, I think I can share this much. She told me once, I was talking to her about Cathy's trauma, and she said, don't think of her like a monster, think of her like a little girl. How would you comfort a little girl that is afraid? For whatever reason, that made a huge difference to me in how I saw the situation. And then of course we did the EMDR to help us clear our own trauma. That doesn't mean we don't still have incidents. I mean, we'll step on a landmine once in a while and somebody calls time out and we come back in a half an hour or whatever and talk it through. And usually, I mean, with few exceptions, we solve it quickly. We always start those with a word of prayer just to try to set the tone.
Yeah, but that EMDR is like magic. I mean, it's like all this, I don't even know how it works. I mean, it's just like this, it's back and forth, either handheld device or it can be manual with a, certified therapist who knows how to do it, but it's just magical. It really helped us be able to communicate so much more easily. And I think it was better than marriage therapy, don't you?
Right. And sometimes there is something that comes up in your marriage that you're really afraid.
Yes.
you're really afraid to talk about. And
How I Met Your Mother, Lily and Marshall Potts.
that's a
Totally
good
it.
example of a timeout.
Which is so funny that your guys' company is Lily and Lily. That's really ironic.
Yeah, and we don't have that example in the book, but there's stuff about timeouts in here. And as an example of making agreements to create an intentional relationship that take you in the direction you want to go. It can be other things too. Like, we know that we both tend to get very involved and passionate about everything from work to love in later years to writing a book together. And we have a very firm intention every week to go on at least one date, and gives us a little time away from all the work and just to renew that relationship. It's another example of being intentional, but I think there's thousands of possible agreements you could make.
Well, and Noah and I are reading a book that was recommended as that's Gottman's book. Honey, will you pull it up again?
Which one is it?
It's The 8 Dates.
Okay, that is quoted in this book. All 8 of the dates are summarized. Yeah, because those are really important conversations to have before you get married. I mean, we didn't go into it in huge detail. It was just sort of whether you get the Gottman's book and go through that or just, do it informally. Those are super important topics.
Yep. And that was one of the things, and same thing that they talked about how people fight. So yeah, that's really, that's great.
Yeah. So I just typed in our website just so anyone interested can go there and get whatever resources they would like from it.
Yeah, I think the 8 dates is a great idea.
Yeah.
Especially if with somebody that you're contemplating marriage with. I make this joking comment in our book that we require people to have 6 discussions or whatever it is now before they get baptized in the church, but we have no formal discussion program before people get married
or have children.
I know, and so many other churches, they do. They make you do marriage counseling, and ours doesn't, and it's weird to me.
Yeah. So anyway, we recommend the 8 discussions or the 8 dates or the 8 missionary discussions for getting married. And there's other things you're going to want to talk about as well, but that's a really good foundation, I think. One thing I think people are really. This is a place where we all want to kid ourselves when we're dating, and we think this other person's perfect. And so we think about, well, we'll deal with that when it comes up. That's not being intentional, and you don't want to deal with it later and have it blow up. You want to bring it up in a systematic way where it's not a hot issue at the moment, and discover if you got work to do there.
Yeah, I was dating a guy, and I said, I want to do marriage counseling before we get married so that we know how to fight properly before there's a problem. And he was like, why? We don't have any problems. And I was like, and that's a problem.
Well,
if
you're going to.
Yeah, and if you don't know how you're going to handle conflict together, when it does come up, you don't really know what your relationship's made of yet. That's
why wait until you're 7 years in when you're bitter and you've got all these problems. I'd rather learn how to fight properly, up front.
We did premarital counseling too. And it wasn't that we thought we had any particularly big issues, but we felt we've both been divorced twice. We want to approach this really intentionally because that's how we think we're going to beat the odds and go the distance together. And it was so funny because that therapist had a way of hitting both of our nerves. And we would go to lunch after we went to these therapy sessions and bag on the therapist together.
I know. I remember one day you felt picked on, and I was like, "Yeah, she picked on you."
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it was her that was mad. Sometimes it was me. Sometimes we were both mad. But then we'd go bag on the therapist over lunch. And
That's funny.
Important to be on the same side.
Yeah, there you go. All right, my friends. Well, thank you so much. This was great. And I look forward to reading your book.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate that.
Thanks for having us. It was really great to come back a year later and meet with you
Yeah,
guys.
that's great. It's just awesome that you wrote a book. So that's awesome.
Well, like we said, we wish there was a book. And finally, there's a whole long story that I won't bother you with right now, but we decided to write the book we wish we had had.
Mhm.
So,
Yep.
All righty. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Carly. Nice to meet you, Noah and Sarah and Jennifer. And let's see, I think their name already maybe went out. But anyway, it was so nice to meet you guys and read your comments and chat with you. Thank you.
yeah, and Carly and Noah, congratulations on all your plans.
It does look
and-
like we have one question by Larissa.
She's giving you a high five.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
Okay.
High five back. Thank you.